The wind came screaming out of the north like it had teeth. It tore across the open land, dragging snow with it in long, cutting sheets that stung exposed skin and erased tracks as fast as they were made. The frontier lay buried under white and silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears until a man could hear his own blood moving. Night had settled hard, and the moon hung pale behind racing clouds, offering no comfort, only light enough to show how empty the world had become. The widowed cowboy was nearly home when he heard it. Not loud, not clear, just a sound that didn't belong to the wind. He reined in his horse, heart tightening as he listened again. There it was, a weak, broken cry, half swallowed by the storm. He swung down from the saddle, boots crunching through fresh snow, eyes scanning the dark stretch of ground near his fence line. That was when he saw her. She lay twisted near the drifted gate, coat torn open, one arm stretched out as if she'd tried to crawl and failed. Snow had already begun to claim her, settling in her hair, crusting along her sleeves. Her hands were blue-white, fingers stiff and wrong. Frostbitten. Maybe worse. She wasn't sleeping. She was freezing to death. When he knelt beside her, her eyes fluttered open, wide, glassy, filled with something deeper than fear. Betrayal. The kind that cuts warmer than any knife. Her lips moved, but no sound came out this time. Whoever had left her here had done it on purpose. No accident led a woman this far from shelter in weather like this. Easy, he muttered, though his voice came out rough. Her body was light when he lifted her. Too light. She shivered once, violently, then went still against his chest. The wind howled louder, as if angry at being denied its prize. He carried her toward the cabin, each step a choice he knew better than to make. Out here mercy drew attention. Mercy invited trouble. And someone had wanted this woman gone badly enough to let the cold do their killing. At the door, he barked into the darkness behind him, more to the night than to anyone else. Open it. Now. The door slammed shut behind them, cutting off the storm. Inside, firelight flared to life. Outside, the wind kept screaming, furious that its work had been interrupted. The cabin swallowed them whole as the door slammed shut against the storm. Wind screamed outside, clawing at the logs, but inside there was only the crackle of fire and the slow return of breath. The widowed cowboy moved with practiced restraint, laying blankets near the hearth, setting a pot to warm. Every motion was careful, deliberate, like a man handling dynamite with bare hands. The woman huddled on the floor at first, refusing the chair, her back pressed to the wall. Snow melted off her boots in dirty puddles. Her hands shook, not just from cold but from memory. She watched him the way prey watches a hunter, eyes never resting, body coiled to flee. Warmth to her felt dangerous, too close to hope. Drink, the cowboy said, handing her a tin cup of broth. She took it but didn't lower her gaze. The steam fogged her face. Color returned to her cheeks inch by inch. Still, she flinched when the wind slammed the shutters, and again when a log popped in the fire. He noticed everything, said nothing. The cabin held the weight of his solitude. 2 plates on the shelf, one unused for years. A woman's shawl folded and never touched. Loss clung to the walls like smoke stains. Letting someone inside again felt like tearing open an old wound and daring it not to bleed. You alone? She asked finally. Her voice was hoarse. Careful. Been that way a long time, he replied. She nodded, as if that answer confirmed something she already knew. Silence followed. Heavy. Not peaceful, watchful. The cowboy took the chair by the door. He didn't remove his coat. He didn't sleep. Every creak of timber, every howl of wind kept his eyes open. Outside, the cold waited patiently. Inside, trust was the more dangerous threat. When the fire burned low, he added another log. When her breathing slowed, he allowed himself one long exhale. They didn't speak again that night. But neither opened the door. And when dawn's pale light crept through the frost-rimmed window, both were still alive. Proof that sometimes survival begins not with belief, but with restraint. The storm did not loosen its grip. Snow pressed against the windows like a living thing. Wind howling low and steady, trapping the cabin in a world reduced to firelight and breath. Time slowed. Out here, storms had a way of forcing truths to the surface. There was nowhere to go, nowhere to hide from memory. She sat near the hearth, wrapped in blankets, hands finally steady enough to hold a cup. The warmth had reached her bones but not her eyes. Those stayed watchful, measuring. The kind of eyes that had learned pain came quiet, not loud. "They didn't mean for me to be found," she said at last. Her voice was thin but it didn't break. "They rode off laughing. Took my coat. Said the cold would finish what they started." The cowboy didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, jaw clenched tight enough to ache. Betrayal had a sound to it. He knew that sound well. She spoke in pieces, never all at once. How she'd trusted the wrong men. How work turned to debt and debt turned to ownership. How speaking out made her a problem instead of a person. Powerful men didn't like problems. Problems disappeared. Outside, the wind screamed. He listened without interruption. When she finished, silence settled again. But it was different now. He fetched more wood, the simple act grounding him. When he finally spoke, it wasn't explanation. It was confession. "My wife froze one winter like this," he said. The words were blunt, unsoftened, caught between town and home. Storm came fast. I was too far out. The fire popped. Shadows jumped. "She didn't die alone," he added, quieter. "But I've been alone ever since." The cabin held that truth without judgment. The woman looked at him, then really looked. Not at the rifle. Not at the scars. At the man shaped by absence. That night something shifted. She learned the rhythms of the place quickly. Where boards creaked. How to move without noise. When to speak and when silence said more. Strength, he realized, didn't always come loud. Sometimes it came careful. In the morning, when the storm eased just enough to reveal the world beyond the window, she noticed the tracks outside. Old ones. Horses. More than one pass. "They came back," she said softly. The cowboy followed her gaze. The snow hadn't buried everything. Some marks were too deliberate. Too patient. Whoever left her to freeze hadn't counted on mercy. And mercy, it turned out, was dangerous. The cold hadn't taken her. And now neither would they. The storm broke just before dawn. Not all at once. First the wind eased. Then the sky lightened to a dull frozen gray. Silence followed. Heavy and unnatural. Jonah stepped outside, boots crunching against fresh snow. Breath smoking in the air. That was when he saw them. Footprints. Not his. Not hers. Too many. Too deliberate. They curved through the trees and stopped just short of the cabin, as if whoever made them wanted to be seen but not too close. Jonah stood still for a long moment, hand resting near his gun. Inside the cabin, the fire crackled. Behind him, the woman watched through the frost-edged window, her face draining of what little color warmth had given back. "They're coming," she whispered. Hoofbeats followed soon after, slow, measured, unhurried. 3 riders emerged from the trees, coats brushed clean, horses fed well. Men who didn't know hunger. Men who didn't fear winter because they had others to fear it for them. "Mornin'," the lead rider called, tipping his hat. His smile never touched his eyes. "We're looking for someone. A woman. Went missing in the storm." Jonah didn't answer right away. He leaned against the porch post like this was nothing more than idle talk. "Storm takes a lot of things," he said. "Ain't seen what you're looking for." The rider nodded slowly. "Shame. Folks say she had a habit of wanderin', causing trouble. Wouldn't want that trouble landing on the wrong doorstep." The words were polite. The meaning wasn't. Inside, the woman's hands trembled. She knew now, she'd known before, but hope had dulled the edge of it. They hadn't left her to freeze by accident. She was meant to vanish. No tracks. No questions. Just snow over bones. Jonah met the rider's gaze. "You're done here." The smile thinned. "Careful, Crow. Taking in strays can be misunderstood." Jonah's voice dropped. "Ride." For a moment no one moved. Then the riders turned, disappearing back into the trees, their tracks already filling with drifting snow. Jonah didn't relax when they were gone. He shut the door slow and locked it. He knew the truth now. The cold hadn't been the danger. The danger was coming back. Armed, patient, and angry that death had failed. The storm did not end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, like a predator backing off just far enough to circle again. Snow still drifted in lazy sheets, but the wind had lost its teeth. In that uneasy quiet, The widowed cowboy understood a truth the frontier taught well. This was not peace. This was the pause before men came to finish what they had started. He moved without ceremony. Boards were dragged across the floor and nailed over windows, leaving only narrow slits of light in sight. The front door was braced from behind with a beam cut from an old fence post. Each hammer strike echoed sharp and final, like punctuation on a sentence already written in blood. Rifles came down from the wall. He cleaned them slow, breath fogging the metal, hands steady from long habit. Ammunition was counted, then counted again. Supplies were laid out: beans, flour, coffee, nothing wasted. Out here, survival had always been a ledger. What you had, what you might lose. The woman watched at first, wrapped in a blanket near the fire, her skin still pale from the cold that nearly took her life. When she stood, he didn't stop her. When she asked what to do, he didn't lie. You help, he said. If you can't, you rest. She chose to help. Her movements were careful but deliberate. She filled lanterns, stacked cartridges, learned where he placed each rifle and why. Weakness still tugged at her steps, but resolve carried her forward. This was no helpless soul left in the snow anymore. This was someone who refused to be carried again. At one point, she took the hammer from his hand without asking and finished boarding a window. The rhythm of their work began to match. No words, just shared purpose. Outside, the sky lightened. Snow fell quieter now, settling instead of striking. The land revealed itself again, white, vast, waiting. Tracks would show soon. Riders would know where to come. They paused by the door when the last board was set. The cabin looked different. Smaller. Stronger. No longer just a shelter from the cold. A stand. The cowboy handed her a revolver, grip warm from his palm. She met his eyes, searching for doubt. Found none. From that moment on, they were no longer rescuer and rescued. They were something the frontier rarely allowed. Two souls choosing defiance together. And as the storm finally broke apart overhead, the calm that followed felt heavier than the snow ever had. Gray daylight crept over the land like a held breath. The storm had passed, but it left the world stripped bare. Snow packed hard as bone, sky flat and colorless, sound swallowed by cold. The cabin stood alone in that silence, smoke curling from its chimney like a signal it couldn't help sending. They came without thunder this time. Hoofbeats muffled by snow. Dark shapes moving slow, deliberate, circling wide. The widowed cowboy saw them from the narrow slit between boards he'd left unsealed. Riders. 5 of them. Maybe more beyond the rise. They spread out, practiced, patient. Men who knew how to wait for fear to do the work. Inside, the woman stiffened. She'd heard them too. They won't stop, she whispered. The cowboy didn't answer. He checked his rifle, fingers steady despite the cold biting through his knuckles. This was the moment he'd been bracing for since he growled open it, now and dragged her in from the snow. Since mercy had crossed the line into defiance. A voice carried across the white ground. Calm. Confident. Hand her over, it called. No need for more blood. The cowboy stepped into view, boots crunching loud on purpose. He wanted them to know where he stood. You left her to die, he said. His voice didn't rise. Didn't have to. You don't get to ask now. A pause. Then a laugh. Short. Ugly. That's your answer? The first shot cracked the air like a snapped branch. Wood exploded beside the window. The cowboy dove back as another round punched through the wall, spraying splinters. Smoke filled the room, sharp and bitter. The siege had begun. Gunfire came in bursts. Then silence. Then bursts again. The attackers tested angles, distance, patience. The cowboy returned fire only when it mattered, each shot measured, deliberate. One rider went down screaming, red blooming bright against the white. The others pulled back, wary now. Inside, the woman moved when he told her, and sometimes before he could. She reloaded with hands that shook but never dropped around. When the door shuddered under a heavy blow, she dragged the table into place without being asked. Basement, he said between shots. If they break through. No, she said, meeting his eyes. Not defiant. Certain. I stay. That stopped him colder than the wind ever could. He saw then what the cold hadn't taken from her. Resolve. Fire buried under frost. They tried fire next. A bottle smashed against the wall, flames licking hungrily before the snow smothered it. Smoke crept low. The cabin groaned, boards popping as bullets chewed into them. Time fractured into moments, reload, breathe, listen. Then the silence came again. The worst kind. The cowboy felt it in his chest. The waiting. The memory of another quiet years ago. Before a door opened and everything he loved bled out into the dirt. His grip tightened. He would not lose someone again. Not like that. Not because he hesitated. Movement. A shadow at the side door. He fired through the wood. A body fell hard. Close enough that he heard the air leave it. The remaining men rushed then, shouting, desperate to end it. Shots flew wild. One grazed his shoulder, heat flaring bright. He grunted, stayed standing. The woman crawled low, heart pounding so loud she thought it might give her away. When a man burst through the back window, she acted before fear could speak. She brought the poker down hard. Once. Twice. He went still. For a moment, neither of them moved. Smoke hung thick. Snow drifted through broken glass. Outside, a final rider hesitated. Then turned his horse. The cowboy stepped out, rifle trained. Go, he said. And remember who you left in the cold. The man rode. When it was over, the cabin stood scarred, blackened, bleeding heat into the snow, but still standing. The cowboy leaned against the wall, breath ragged. The woman stood across from him, face streaked with soot and tears she hadn't noticed falling. They'd held. Not because they were stronger, but because neither of them was willing to let the cold decide who lived and who was forgotten. Silence returned slowly, like it was unsure whether it was welcome. The gun smoke thinned. The echoes of boots and shouting faded into the trees. What was left stood battered but breathing, the cabin still upright, its walls scarred by lead, its door hanging crooked but unbroken. The homestead had been tested, and it had held. Outside, the storm finally loosened its grip. Snow slid from the roof in heavy sighs, breaking apart as it hit the ground. Gray clouds cracked open just enough to let pale light spill through, touching the land like a cautious hand. Winter hadn't vanished, but it had begun to retreat. The woman stepped onto the porch, wrapped in a blanket that no longer felt borrowed. Her breath no longer came in frightened bursts. She looked out at the clearing, at the trampled snow, at the long road that had almost ended her life. She was no longer something discarded, no longer prey. The frontier had tried to erase her, and failed. Inside, the widowed cowboy sat heavily at the table, his rifle resting against the wall. His hands trembled now that the danger had passed. He stared at the fire, watching ice melt from his boots, realizing something he hadn't expected. In saving her, he had felt his own heart stir. Aching, yes, but alive. The cold that had lived in him since his wife's death had cracked. Not gone, but cracked. She joined him by the fire. No grand words. No promises spoken aloud. Just presence. Just warmth shared. The frontier rarely offered clean endings, but sometimes it allowed renewal. Snow gave way to water. Silence gave way to breath. And two lives, once marked for loneliness and death, found something sturdier than survival. They found a future worth defending. Out here on the frontier, the cold doesn't just live in the snow. It lives in silence. In the way people look away. In the way cruelty survives when no one speaks against it. The law of the land was simple: endure or be erased. And too often, mercy was treated like weakness. But every so often someone chose otherwise. That woman was meant to vanish beneath the frost, forgotten by morning. And the widowed cowboy knew the cost the moment he opened that door. Mercy invited danger. Compassion painted a target. Yet in defying the cold, he broke a deeper law, the one that says survival is all that matters. So let me ask you, as the fire burns low, what would you have done? When turning away meant safety and opening the door meant war, would you have listened to the wind or to your conscience? If this story stayed with you, leave your thoughts here, where the tracks haven't yet faded. Share your answer by the fire. And if you wish to keep these frontier tales alive, stories of justice, loss, and hard-earned hope, then subscribe and ride with us again. The cabin is quiet now. Firelight dances on the walls. Outside, the snow melts slow and steady, and in that thaw a future, once stolen by cruelty, is finally reclaimed.